as usual, I try to do something to show an effect, and people don't fully agree with it. So I am redoing my float test with horizontal distance to just totally put this to rest. You can't see really right now, but it's actually a relatively windy day. It's just after it rained. It rained last night, surprisingly. And I'm going to do this test with this quad, which is, I don't even know what the weight is, I forgot. But basically I'm going to run it with the 1300 milliamp 100C pack from China Hobby Line, which is going to be 527 grams. And then I'm going to redo it with the 800 milliamp pack from Pyrodrone, which will make it about 450 grams all up weight. And then I'm going to do it a third time with a new freshly charged, these are all charged at 16.8 volts, China Hobby Line 100C with this weight, which is about 70 grams. So that'll put the all up weight right at about 600 grams, which is still about 10 or 15 grams lighter than your typical alien acro build of whatnot. And we are testing to see horizontal float distance, float time, whatever it is. And this is how I'm going to try and test it. This is my kind of learning grounds that I have here. And you can see these are the row of palm trees that you've probably seen in all my other videos. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to launch over that first palm tree and then see how far I can soar across these palm trees. So that last palm tree is pretty good distance. So I've chosen a 70 gram weight difference because I feel like 70 grams is about the difference between a sort of light acro setup and a heavier acro setup. So I'm not really going to go, not going to compare like a 300 gram quad to a 600 gram quad because it's pointless. And my theory is that 70 grams is not really enough mass to make a real world difference with like air, air drag. And I'm using the same craft, so the aerodynamic profile is going to be identical. So aerodynamics is out of it, and air is kind of, like I said, I don't think that 70 grams is enough weight to make a difference for general drag air slowing it down. Now, if you did a 300 gram quad versus a 600 gram quad, I think that the 300 gram quad will have to move considerably faster in order to get the same kind of float time. That being said, I'm pretty confident that I can get the same float with my 4-inch quad as I can with my 5-inch quad. And I say that because I've done it many times. And I was going to do it again here, but I just forgot to bring it with me. So if you want, I'll post a link to my YouTube and to my Instagram, and you can watch the 4-inch floating on my Instagram because it's all analog video anyways. Anyways, let's see what happens. You know what I think the results will be. I think that the results will be the same as before. The lighter quad will float the same as the heavier quad. And what actually gives you more float time is having more power in a smaller package. Now, power it's a complicated term. That's actually, it's got a lot of factors in it. And I'm actually going to explain that a little bit further after the test. One thing to note is that I have strapped this ballast weight in such a way that the balance is correct at about 45 degrees, which is going to be generally what I'm going to aim to launch at. So that's a very important point, because if the weight was actually back, then I would never achieve maximum speed because the back props would have to work too hard to get it up to speed. Anyways, in a previous video I've discussed this completely, but just know that I have accounted for the unbalanced weight when launching. So important fact that is definitely something that should be taken into consideration. A top-mounted battery will not have this issue as much, but it does still have this kind of an issue. So here's what I got from all this testing. In general, it's more complicated than we think. It's not as simple as taking the same craft, adding some weight, and expecting to be able to launch harder and fly farther when you're inverted trying to float over a tree. In all 3 tests, I did not feel like I was getting any more or less float time when I was just flying around in general. The general flight feel felt similar in terms of inverted hang time or hang time in general. People have proposed things like something that's heavier will have a better aerodynamic advantage for being able to maintain its momentum or inertia traveling through air because it can cut through the air a little bit easier. And I agree with that. I generally agree with that. I agree with all the arguments in that respect. But what I'm just saying here is that it's not so simple. And just going with a heavier quad because you think that it's going to be able to cut through the air or soar through the air easier is incorrect. That's not how it is. In the real world, the heavier quad is going to be slower. The lighter quad will be faster. And I'm going to propose something else. In terms of launch potential and launch power, I think that is entirely governed by your battery and your drivetrain. If you take the same quad and load it up within reasonable measure, load it up with a little bit extra weight, you're going to get the same launch momentum and same general flight path and pattern. If you load it up with too much weight, then your props and motors and things can't really get the thing moving properly to be able to get it to the momentum necessary to launch it at the same general momentum to be able to get the same kind of float time. So that's it. I mean, draw your own conclusions. There's going to be a continued debate about this, but in general, I prefer the lighter craft because with something that's 70 grams lighter, I get far more performance in all other respects, and I get the same float time and I get the same hang time. So I don't need to have the weight in order to get that kind of throwability that people discuss and often talk about and have argued so much with me about. I am personally going to think about the ability to launch as the performance of the battery and the motors and the props together in order to give you that full momentum or full power. And I think that 70 grams is not enough to make any kind of aerodynamic difference, any kind of predictability of path difference, or any other kind of difference in terms of zero throttle or minimum throttle float or just soaring through the air. It's going to be the same. If you can compare something that's much lighter, like a few hundred grams lighter, or much heavier, like a few hundred grams heavier, then okay, I would say these kinds of things do make a difference. But in terms of an acrobatic setup, which is a little bit lighter or a little bit heavier, I would go for the lighter one because I am going to get much more performance in the punch, much more throttle control, much more ability to correct myself if I make errors, and I get more damage resistance in crashes. I don't carry enough inertia to break things as much. I'm also going to go a little bit further and say that my 4-inch quad, which I am going to link in the description, has the same kind of float as the 5-inch quad because it has the same kind of performance as the 5-inch quad. So this 4-inch quad, it's fully the same performance as the 5-inch quad. It's very similar in terms of just speed and handling in all respects. It's a little bit more agile, of course, because it weighs less, but in terms of actual performance on a track, it's about the same, maybe a little bit better because of the increased agility. In the link, I will have a link in the description below. I'll have a link to my Instagram post of this thing floating through the air, and you can determine if you think it floats more or less. But basically, I have just presented this information to you, and you can do with it as you will. I have actually stopped even reading the comments in the last video because there was just so much confusion and just people saying things that didn't make any sense at all. Yeah, so just don't forget to floss, and I'll try to stay away from such controversial topics from now on because it's just like it's so much discussion. I can't even keep up with it. I can't even respond to everybody. Thanks for watching.